Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking that stack of sources you sent over and we're wading into, well, the backyard outdoor pond. Our mission is exploring something super common, often frustrating for anyone keeping fish or aquatic plants, algae blooms, but we're tackling it through a really interesting paradox.
Yeah, the sources detail this specific case. An outdoor pond, okay?
Yeah.
And it gets an algae problem, but here's the twist. It gets the least amount of sun compared to other ponds nearby, like way less sun. Your first thought is probably, hang on, that doesn't track. Algae needs light, right?
Exactly. And that apparent contradiction is why this deep dive is so important for you, the listener. We really need to move beyond that simple sunlight equals algae idea we all learned. It's time to, critically look at the whole system. We're going to show how, for certain kinds of algae anyway, the water quality, the nutrient levels, that can totally trump light exposure. It can drive growth even in pretty deep shade. Okay, so let's jump right in. How do we even start identifying this counterintuitive problem? Usually when you think algae problem, you picture that, like pea soup green pond, don't you? Water so thick and murky you can't see anything. That's sort of the classic image linked to too much sun.
That's the standard picture, yeah. But here's the absolute crucial detail the observer noted in the source material. The water in this shaded pond, it was described as crystal clear.
Crystal clear. That sounds good, right? Like the opposite of a problem. Why is that specific observation so vital for diagnosis?
Well, because that clarity instantly tells us it's not the typical green water bloom fueled by light.
Mm-hmm.
Green water that's caused by gazillions of tiny free-floating algae cells just exploding in population. If the water itself is clear, we know those little floating guys aren't the main issue. They just aren't taking hold.
Okay.
So what the observer did find was something different. A specific, maybe mild case of thread algae or hair algae. Those long, stringy filaments attached to rocks, maybe the liner size.
Ah, right, the stringy stuff.
And that's a critical difference. Hair algae, because it's attached, it tends to be much better at sucking nutrients right out of the water column, or even from gunk on the surfaces it's attached to.
So the clear water is basically a big flashing sign saying, hey, don't blame the sunshine, look at what's dissolved in the water instead.
Precisely. The clear water shifts the focus. It strongly suggests light isn't the main driver here. It points directly towards water quality, the chemistry, the unseen nutrients as the dominant factor, more important even than the limited sunlight. Hair algae in clear water just screams nutrient issue.
Okay, let's unpack this then. If light isn't the primary issue, we need to really focus on what's feeding this algae in the water, which brings us, I guess, to this idea of nutrient imbalance.
Right, and it's interesting to think about what those nutrients actually are.
Yeah.
Usually when we talk about algae fuel, we mean things like excess nitrates, that's the N, and phosphates, the P. These are basic building blocks for plants, sure, but if you get too much of them floating around, well, opportunistic stuff like algae just goes wild. They have everything they need.
And the source material, it walks us through this logical step-by-step to find the source of these nutrients. They looked at fish waste first, which is, the usual suspect in ponds, but they figured it was unlikely here because the actual number of fish in this specific pond was pretty low.
Yeah, and that's a smart diagnostic step. A low fish load means the sort of background day-to-day nutrient input is probably minimal. Fish waste adds nutrients gradually.
Right. But the source material points to something else, something maybe more concentrated. Uneaten food. That was flagged as the most likely culprit behind this particular hair algae bloom. I think we've all been there, tossing in a bit extra for the fish.
Oh, absolutely. And that little bit of extra kindness, it can have real ecological impacts, especially in a pond without strong circulation. Uneaten food sinks, right? Then it starts to break down, decompose, and as it does, bam, it releases these big, concentrated pulses of nutrients, nitrates, and especially phosphates right down there where the hair algae is sitting, waiting. It's like pouring gasoline on a campfire compared to the slow burn of fish waste.
Okay, that makes sense. But it does bring up a big question about maintenance because, you'd think nutrient buildup means somebody just hasn't done a water change in ages.
But that's where this gets even more interesting, more paradoxical. According to the notes, the observer had actually just done a massive maintenance job, a 100% water change.
Whoa, a complete reset, 100%.
Okay.
And the algae still came back. Why wouldn't that fix it? Why did such a drastic measure fail long term?
Well, think about it. A 100% water change. Chemically, yeah, it resets the water, but ecologically, it's a massive shock. You're basically stripping away the entire established community, the beneficial bacteria on surfaces, the stable water chemistry, any kind of natural balance the pond had developed.
Okay. Like hitting a reset button too hard.
Yeah.
Exactly. Create this really unstable environment. So then, as soon as new nutrients get introduced, maybe the next time they feed the fish, even just a day or two later,
Hmm.
there's nothing really established in the system. No healthy bacteria colonies, no competing plants to quickly grab those nutrients. The ecosystem's kind of vulnerable. And guess what thrives in vulnerable, nutrient-rich conditions? Fast-growing, opportunistic algae. It just jumps right back in.
Yeah.
So that big water change, it actually highlights that the system needs stability, not just a drastic reset.
So the issue wasn't really a lack of maintenance overall, but maybe the wrong kind of maintenance. That huge reset actually cleared the path for the algae to take over again right after the next feeding.
That seems to be the strong conclusion, yes. It
Yeah.
created a perfect window of opportunity.
All right, so we figured out the likely cause this hair algae, fueled by nutrient spikes from uneaten food, popping up even without much sun. So what's the plan? First, you've got to deal with the algae that's already there, right?
And the source mentions a really simple hands-on way to remove it,
Yeah.
almost fun.
Yeah.
It recommends just using a wooden skewer, like for kebabs, or even a plastic chopstick. And the technique is basically you stick it in and you twirl the algae like spaghetti and pull it out. I love that description.
It is a good visual, and honestly pretty satisfying to do. Gets rid of the existing biomass right away. And that's important, because if you just kill algae and leave it in the pond, it decomposes and guess what? Releases all its nutrients back into the water to feed the next bloom.
The cycle continues.
Exactly. But, like we established, just pulling it out only treats the symptom, not the underlying cause. Right, so the real goal has to be long-term prevention, making sure it doesn't just keep coming back. And connecting back to what we were just saying, the maintenance routine needs a total rethink. Moving away from that shocking 100% change to something more proactive, stable.
Precisely. Since the core issue seems to be these regular nutrient inputs from feeding, the maintenance has to focus on regular nutrient export. Think of the pond like a bank account. Feeding is making deposits. You need a regular way to make withdrawals to keep the balance in check.
Okay, makes sense. And the specific recommendation for prevention is pretty clear. Small, regular water changes. Specifically doing like a 10% to 15% water change every week.
Yeah, that small, consistent percentage seems to be the sweet spot. It takes out a manageable amount of those excess nitrates and phosphates each week. But crucially, it does it without causing a major shock to the system. It doesn't wipe out your beneficial bacteria. It just keeps those nutrient levels from ever hitting that critical point where the hair algae can really take off. It's kind of the difference between, say, weeding your garden a little bit each week versus letting it get overgrown and then trying to clear the whole thing once a year. One is much more stable.
Consistency beats intensity. That really feels like the main takeaway here for anyone managing a pond or even an aquarium. Hashtag outro.
So yeah, to sum up the really key learning for you, the listener, don't automatically assume light is the problem for every type of algae, especially if you see persistent thread or hair algae, and especially if the water is clear. That's a really strong signal. It points towards an underlying nutrient imbalance, probably those excess nitrates and phosphates, often coming from things like uneaten food. Clear water isn't a guarantee of perfect health. It just means you don't have that free-floating green stuff.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest lesson from the observer's experience in these notes is just how powerful those small, consistent actions are compared to big, reactive ones. That huge 100% water change. It failed because it destabilized everything, letting the problem bounce right back. The sources really underline that the path to keeping things balanced is that steady, simple 10 to 15% weekly change. Proactive control, keeping things stable. That's just way more effective than these massive disruptive fixes after the fact. Which leaves us with maybe one final thought for you to chew on, something based on everything we've discussed today. If crystal clear water doesn't automatically mean a pond is healthy or perfectly balanced, and you want to catch nutrient problems before algae takes over, what other maybe more subtle signs could you look for? Visual cues, maybe even fish behavior, things besides obvious algae or murky water that might hint at a low-level nutrient issue building up in your own pond or tank. Something to think about. Thanks for diving deep with us today.